Once upon a time, deep inside time itself, before even names had been invented, this land was never just a geographical location. The mountains stood like silent guardians. The plains stretched endlessly beyond what the eye could see. And humans were just beginning to learn how to survive in such a harsh and unforgiving land. This was the beginning of what would later be called the Iranian Plateau. But back then, no one knew this soil would one day become the center of one of the most complex civilizations in human history. The first real image of pre-Islamic Iran lies somewhere between myth and reality. The realm of the Medes, a harsh tribal world filled with fragile alliances. Nothing was stable. Today you're an ally, tomorrow that same ally becomes your deadliest enemy. Power had not yet taken the shape of a state. It still existed in the form of tribes. But right here, something important begins to happen. The idea of unity is born for the first time. The Medes acted like a bridge between scattered tribes and what would later become a true empire. And then, suddenly, the scene changes. Cyrus. Not just a name, not just a king, but a historical explosion point. Here, Iran takes its first real...
Not the version you've seen in textbooks, but something more real. A massive palace city carved out of stone, as if pulled from the mountains themselves. Stones shaped by human hands. Reliefs that still seem to move after thousands of years. Soldiers from many nations. Different clothes, different languages, yet all standing in one line. Here, something crucial happens. Iran defines itself as the center of the known world, not only through power, but through display. But history never stays in one place. Alexander arrives, and everything begins to crack. Persepolis burns. But here is the key point.
And then the Sassanids. Here, Iran becomes strong again, more centralized, more organized, more ideological. Fire temples burn brightly. Zoroastrianism becomes the backbone of power. Kings call themselves Shahan Shah, King of Kings. Imagine the rock reliefs of Naqshi Rustam, a king grabbing his defeated enemy, forcing him to kneel. Not just power, but a message. We are still here. But beneath this glory, a serious problem is forming. Heavy structure, rigid social classes, a wide gap between rulers and people. The empire is vast, but not flexible. And here, history slowly prepares for another massive shift.
Now imagine one final scene. A night in Persepolis. Wind passing through the columns, shadows moving across ancient walls. No kings, no armies, only stone and memory. And this is exactly what defines pre-Islamic Iran. Not just history, but a trace of thousands of years of power, collapse, war, order, chaos, and rebuilding. And perhaps the most important truth is this. Pre-Islamic Iran is not a past. It is a layer that has been built up, compressed, and still breathes underneath everything today.
Just imagine for a moment all that glory we talked about in the first part. Thrones, crowns, stone reliefs, wars, empires. Suddenly, it all feels heavier. Not from the outside, but from within. This is exactly where the story of pre-Islamic Iran enters its second phase. A phase where it's no longer just about power, but about exhaustion. Somewhere deep in history, Iran is no longer that unbeatable empire. The Sassanids are still there, magnificent, organized, with fire temples burning day and night. But under that light, a massive shadow has formed. Fatigue. Not the fatigue of a soldier, but the fatigue of a civilization. Now imagine this, a king sitting on his throne, surrounded by laws, rituals.
And right at this moment, history begins to change its breath. From outside, empires still exist. Rome is on one side, Iran on the other. But these two giants are no longer fighting just to win. They are fighting because they no longer know another way. Centuries of war, not for conquest, but for exhaustion. Here is an important point. No empire dies by the sword alone. First, it empties from within. And Sassanid Iran was slowly becoming empty. Heavy taxation, extreme class inequality, power concentrated in a few noble families, and the people further away than ever. But this story is not only politics, it is life too. Imagine a farmer working from morning to night,
only for the result of his labor to disappear into palaces he will never see. Or a soldier who no longer knows why he is fighting, for land, for the king, or just to keep the war going. And here, something dangerous begins to form. Meaninglessness. And meaninglessness is more dangerous than any sword. Now go back to the top. The Shahanshah is still sitting on his throne. Reliefs are still being carved into stone. The fire is still burning. But history is slowly whispering something else. This structure is too heavy. And then the same wave we mentioned in the first part returns, but stronger. From borders, from deserts, from places many people underestimated, a force arrives that was not just religion, but a completely new way of life: Islam. But don't get it wrong, this arrival is not a sudden cinematic explosion. It is more like a wave, first calm, then sinking under the ground, then suddenly rising from places no one.
But what makes the story strange is this: nothing is truly erased. The Sassanids fall, but their ideas, their order, their art, and even their view of power remain under the skin of history. History is not a book that ends on the last page. It is a living organism that changes its skin. Now imagine one final scene. Night. A fire temple still burning, wind passing through ancient columns, but the sound is fading. Not gone, just transforming. And this is exactly where part 2 ends. Not with a full collapse, not with an ending, but with a half-finished sentence. When a civilization gets tired, history does not wait.
Everything is still in place. The fire is still burning, the king is still on the throne, borders still exist on the map. But something has changed. The air itself. It feels like history has realized it is time to turn the page. Sassanid Iran, that vast empire, that eastern pillar of the world, now feels like a tired body that has fought for centuries, standing strong, but no longer able to hide its wounds. What is happening inside? A heavy structure, a complex government, a layered society. But beneath all of it, exhaustion. The king is still a king, but the weight of his power no longer feels the same. The nobles are still there, but instead of being pillars, they have become walls. The people still live, but it feels like they have been slowly removed.
This name would later become massive, but at that time it was just a movement, a human, social, and ideological flow moving faster than everything around it. But don't misunderstand, this is not just the arrival of a religion. This is the arrival of a new way of seeing the world. A worldview that says power is not only in crowns, it is in human beings. Now look at Iran. This land had already seen 1,000 years of empires, from the Medes to the Achaemenids, from the Parthians to the Sassanids. Every time it fell, every time it rose again. But this time is different. This time the enemy is not only outside, time itself is on its side. Wars begin. Not one war, but waves of conflict. Long, exhausting, and draining. Not just for land, but for surviving itself.
And in these moments, something strange happens. Armies that once made the world tremble now fight with fatigue. Commanders who were once certain now hesitate. And people who once supported the empire now simply watch. And then a moment that no one can pinpoint exactly arrives. The balance breaks. Not a dramatic collapse, not a cinematic fall. A release. Capitals fall, borders open, structures break apart one by one. But here is the key. Iran does not end, because Iran was never just a government. Iran was a layer. The Sassanids disappear, but the stones remain. Languages change, but the memory of the land does not. The fire goes out, but the ashes still hold warmth. And now, the most important moment of the story. What we thought was an ending was not an ending at all. It was transformation. The story of pre-Islamic Iran does not end here. It simply changes form, like a river changing its course, while the water remains the same. Now, imagine the final scene. Night. Wind passes through the ruins of palaces. Walls that once represented power are now only shadows. Fire temples are extinguished, but the smell of smoke still lingers in the air. No soldiers, no kings, no armies. Only the land. And the land is always the final witness of history. And this is where the story of